Clara Whitmore had buried 3 dreams by the age of 24: her mother, her fortune, and her faith in men who made promises. She stood at the edge of the candlelit ballroom, watching the most powerful man in Virginia refuse every woman who approached him, not with cruelty, but with something worse. Indifference. And something foolish rose in her chest. Something reckless. She leaned toward her friend and whispered 4 words she would spend the rest of the summer trying to take back. If this story already has your heart racing, subscribe to this channel, follow Clara's story all the way to the end, and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. The summer of 1816 came to Virginia like a punishment. The harvest had been thin, the roads were dry and cracked, and yet the Halcourt family still threw a party because that was what people of standing did when the world fell apart around them. They lit the candles, pressed the good linen, and pretended. Clara Whitmore was very good at pretending. She stood near the far window of the Halcourt estate's main hall, her ivory gloves still on, because she had no intention of shaking another hand tonight. Around her, the room hummed with the particular sound of wealthy people talking about nothing. Cotton prices dressed up as conversation, land disputes disguised as gossip, and every eligible daughter in the county quietly positioned like pawns on a chessboard. Clara was not a pawn. She had decided that at 16, when she watched her mother cry over a man who claimed to love her but chose his debts over his family. She had reinforced that decision at 20, when a man with kind eyes and a silver tongue asked for her hand while owing money to half of Richmond. And she had made it law in her own heart at 23, when her father, bless him, God help him, gambled away the last 300 acres of the Whitmore Southern field in a single evening. So no, she was not a pawn, she was simply present, surviving, and quietly furious about it. "You have that look again," said Margaret Ellis, appearing at her elbow, with 2 glasses of punch, neither of them particularly wanted. "What look?" "The one where you are deciding whether to stay or simply walk home through the dark." "The dark is quieter," Clara said. Margaret laughed, soft, careful, the laugh of a woman who had learned to take up less space in rooms like these. Then she followed Clara's gaze across the hall, and her expression shifted. "He came," she murmured. Clara had already noticed him. You could not notice Nathaniel Carter. He stood near the fireplace, not because he was cold, Clara suspected, but because it was the position in the room that allowed him to see every entrance and exit without turning his head. He was tall. He was broad-shouldered in the way that men who have actually worked with their hands tended to be, which was unusual for someone of his wealth. His coat was dark, his jaw was set, and his eyes from this distance she could not name the color, but she could name the quality of them. They were the eyes of a man who trusted nothing. Half the women in the room had already found reasons to drift in his direction. Mrs. Halcourt's eldest daughter had passed him twice. The Prescott girl had laughed very loudly at something near his elbow. Not one of them had earned so much as a glance. Nathaniel Carter had fought in the War of 1812 and come home with fewer words than he left with. He had built a shipping empire along the Chesapeake that people said now moved more cargo than any 3 other operations combined. He had bought the old Carver estate and expanded it. He had contributed to the church fund and the Veterans Relief, and had never once attended the event where the contribution was thanked. He was 32 years old, unmarried, and by Clara's estimation, deeply uninterested in changing that. "Do you think he has ever loved anyone?" Margaret asked quietly. Clara looked at him, really looked, at the way he held his glass without drinking from it, at the way his shoulders never quite relaxed, at the way he watched everyone in the room with the particular attention of a man who was looking for something, or watching for something, but had stopped hoping to find it. She felt something unexpectedly sad stir in her chest. She stamped it out immediately. "That man," she said, and she let the amusement come into her voice because it was safer than the alternative. "I bet he is the worst kisser in America." Margaret burst into a laugh she had to cover with her fan. Clara smiled, took a sip of her punch, let herself enjoy the small victory of making her friend laugh in a room that didn't give either of them much to laugh about. And then she heard it, a voice, low, quiet, so close it moved the hair at the back of her neck. A dangerous accusation, Miss Whitmore, from someone with no evidence to support it. Clara did not drop her glass. She was very proud of that later. She turned slowly because turning quickly would have admitted she was startled, and she was not prepared to give him that, and found Nathaniel Carter standing less than 2 feet behind her. He had not been there a moment ago. She was certain of it. And yet here he was in the shadow between the window drape and the wall, close enough that she could see exactly what color his eyes were. Gray. Not a soft gray. The gray of a winter river. He was looking at her with an expression she could not immediately classify. Not anger. Not amusement. Something in between, or something entirely separate from both. "Mr. Carter," she said, and her voice was remarkably steady. She decided to be proud of that too. "I was not aware you were standing there." "Clearly," he said. The word landed without cruelty, just fact. "I apologize," she said, because she had been raised with manners even when she was not particularly feeling them. "That was unkind of me." "It was honest," he said. "I prefer honest." He paused. "How did you arrive at your conclusion?" She stared at him. "I beg your pardon. Your assessment of my—" And here something moved at the corner of his mouth, something that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one, capabilities. "I'm curious about your methodology." Clara felt heat rise to her face and was furious about it. "I was making idle conversation, Mr. Carter. I did not intend—" "You said it with conviction," he said. "Most idle conversation lacks conviction. Most people don't listen to other people's idle conversations." "I wasn't listening," he said. "I was standing in my own house." She looked around and realized with a drop of her stomach that the Halcourt estate had indeed been sold 2 seasons ago. She had simply forgotten, or chosen not to remember. "This is your home," she said. "It is," he said. There was a pause. Around them the party continued music, laughter, the clink of crystal, but it felt suddenly very far away. "Then I owe you a more complete apology," Clara said, "and I offer one. I spoke carelessly, and I should not have." "Good evening, Mr. Carter." She turned to leave. "Miss Whitmore." She stopped. She was not sure why she stopped. She told herself it was simply good breeding. "There is something I need to speak with you about," he said. "Privately, not here." She looked back at him over her shoulder. "I don't think that would be appropriate." "No," he agreed. "It would not be. And yet—" He reached into his coat pocket and produced an envelope. He held it toward her, not pressing it into her hand, simply offering. "Your father gave me permission to give you this. Tonight." Clara looked at the envelope. Her father's handwriting was on the front. Her name in his particular slanted cursive. Her hand moved before she decided to move it. She took the envelope. "The library is at the end of the east corridor," Nathaniel Carter said quietly. "I will be there in 10 minutes. I would ask that you come." And then he walked away back into the party, as if the conversation had never happened. Clara stood in the library for 3 minutes before she opened the letter. She needed those 3 minutes to breathe, to convince herself that she was not a foolish woman being drawn into something she did not understand, to remind herself that she did not trust men who kept secrets or issued quiet summonses. Then she opened the letter. Her father's handwriting was shakier than she remembered. That was the first thing she noticed, and it frightened her more than the words that followed. "Clara, my dear, by the time you read this I will have spoken to Carter. I know you will not understand at first, and I know you may not forgive me, but I need you to listen to what he tells you tonight. Please. Not for my sake, I have forfeited the right to ask for things on my own behalf, but for your mother's memory, for the house, for everything that was supposed to be yours. I'm sorry. I have said that so many times it may mean nothing by now. But tonight, it means everything." "Father." Clara read it twice. Then she folded it very carefully and placed it in her glove, pressed flat against her wrist, and stood very still in the middle of the library, surrounded by other people's books, and waited. Nathaniel Carter arrived in exactly 10 minutes. He closed the door behind him. Not quickly, not stealthily, just with the quiet efficiency of a man who did everything with the minimum amount of wasted motion. He looked at her face when he came in. Whatever he saw there made him nod once, as if she had answered a question he had not yet asked. "Sit down, Miss Whitmore," he said. "I'd rather stand," she said. "Tell me what is happening with my father." He looked at her for a moment. Then he crossed to the desk in the corner, pulled out one of the chairs, and sat himself. She had the strange sense that this was a courtesy, making himself lower than her, less imposing, and she did not know what to do with that. "Your father," he said, "is a good man who trusted a bad one." "That," Clara said, "is something I could have told you years ago." "I know," he said. "But the bad man I'm referring to is not a gambling partner. He is William Prescott." Clara went very still. William Prescott. She knew the name. Everyone in Virginia knew the name. Wealthy merchant, well-dressed, well-liked. The kind of man who remembered the names of your children and contributed generously to every public cause, and somehow always seemed to be standing near the people with the most to lose when they lost it. "Mr. Prescott is a respected member of this community," she said carefully. "Mr. Prescott," Nathaniel said in the same tone, "has spent the last 4 years systematically robbing respected members of this community through a scheme of false investments and manipulated land contracts. He is very good at it. He has had a great deal of practice." Clara stared at him. "And my father signed over the deed to the Whitmore Eastern property 6 months ago, along with a promissory note that, depending on how certain things fall, could be used to claim the house itself." The floor felt different suddenly. Not less solid. She was not the kind of woman who went faint, but different, as if it had shifted very slightly under her feet. "6 months," she said. "He did this 6 months ago and said nothing to me." "He was ashamed," Nathaniel said simply. "And Prescott's contracts contain a silence clause. Your father believed that speaking about it to anyone would make the situation worse." "Would it have?" "No," he said. "But fear rarely responds to logic." Clara pressed her hands flat against the back of a chair. "What does any of this have to do with you, Mr. Carter? You are a shipping merchant, not a magistrate." He looked at her for a long moment. "There is more to the situation than your father's land, Miss Whitmore. Prescott is not simply stealing from families in Virginia. He is moving money, significant amounts, to interests that the federal government considers deeply problematic. I have been working with certain people in Washington to document this for the better part of 2 years." "Certain people," she repeated. "Yes." She looked at him. "You are telling me you work for the government." "I am telling you," he said carefully, "that I have been asked to assist in gathering information that the government needs." "An investigation?" "Of a kind." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, distantly, she could hear the music from the party. A waltz. Very cheerful, very inappropriate. "What do you need from me?" she asked. Something shifted in his expression. Not relief, she did not think this man did relief, but something close to it. A small release of tension in the jaw. "Prescott keeps records," he said. "Detailed ones. He is meticulous, which is part of what makes him difficult to catch. He does not trust banks with the most sensitive documents. He keeps them himself or near himself at whichever house he considers most secure." "And which house is that?" Nathaniel looked at her steadily. "He has recently acquired the Whitmore Northern Cottage, as part of the contract your father signed." Clara felt something cold and sharp move through her. "He is living on our land." "He has been using the cottage as a secondary office," he said. "Your family's name is still on the county record for the property. The full transfer has not been registered, which means that technically you still have a legal reason to be there." She understood then. All at once, she understood. "You want me to get into that cottage?" she said. "I want you to have a legitimate reason to be seen near it," he said. "If you were to visit the property to retrieve personal belongings, to inspect the condition of a family structure, no one would question it. And while I was there, I would need access to the study. 15 minutes. No more. You'd be with me. I would need to be, he said. There are certain things I would need to retrieve that require... He paused. It would not be safe for you to go alone. Clara looked at him. And what prevents Prescott from becoming suspicious? A single woman and a man calling at a cottage together. The silence stretched between them. That, Nathaniel Carter said, with an expression she could only describe as pained, is the second part of what I need to ask you. No, Clara said. Miss Whitmore. Absolutely not. I understand you want to pretend to court me, she said. You want people to believe that Nathaniel Carter, the cold gentleman of Virginia, has suddenly and inexplicably developed an interest in Clara Whitmore, and that this is why we would be seen together at a property that used to belong to my family, and now belongs to the man you are investigating. That is an accurate summary, he said. And you see no flaw in this plan. I see several flaws, he said, but it is the least dangerous option remaining. Least dangerous for whom? For your father, he said quietly. Clara stopped. He did not press the moment. He simply let it sit there between them, and she hated him a little for understanding exactly where to place it. If Prescott realizes your father has spoken to anyone, Nathaniel said, the silence clause gives him legal grounds to accelerate the debt collection. The house, Miss Whitmore. Not just the land, your family home. She thought of the house. The window in the upstairs hall where the light came in sideways in the late afternoon. The smell of her mother's rose garden in July. The worn step on the back porch where her father sat every Sunday morning with his coffee before everything fell apart. If I do this, she said, if I agree to this arrangement, my family's debt, all of it, what happens to it? If we retrieve the documents from the cottage and they contain what I believe they contain, he said, then Prescott's contracts, all of them become void. Your father's agreement among them. And if they don't contain what you believe, his jaw tightened slightly, then we will have tried. That is not a guarantee. No, he said. It is not. She turned away from him, walked to the window. The garden outside was dark and summer thick with heat, and somewhere in the distance there was the sound of frogs near the creek, the same sound she had fallen asleep to every night of her childhood. She thought about her father's handwriting, shakier than she remembered. She thought about the letter pressed flat against her wrist. How long, she asked without turning around. The arrangement. How long would it need to continue? 3 weeks, he said. Perhaps 4. 3 or 4 weeks, she repeated, of being seen together, of people believing... She stopped. People will talk, Mr. Carter, about me, about my character. If I am seen pursuing your company and the arrangement ends with nothing... I am aware, he said. I would not ask it if there were another way. She turned back to look at him then. He had not moved from the desk. His hands were folded on the surface in front of him. His face was still and serious, and there was something in it, not guilt, not exactly, but the expression of a man who was very familiar with the weight of asking hard things of people. You've done this before, she said suddenly. Asked people to take risks they shouldn't have to take. He didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. One condition, she said. He waited. Whatever happens, whether you get what you need or you don't, you do not let my father know the extent of what I did. He carries enough. Something moved through his eyes, gone before she could name it. Agreed, he said. And you tell no one else. Not the people in Washington. Not anyone. If this arrangement exists on paper anywhere, my name comes off it. Agreed, he said again. She walked back across the library. She stopped in front of him. He had risen from the desk, not quickly, not in a hurry, just with the quiet courtesy of a man who had been taught that you stood when a lady approached, and who apparently continued doing so even in the middle of an impossible negotiation. She looked at him straight. I want you to understand something, Mr. Carter. Go ahead, he said. I am doing this for my family. Not for you, not for Washington, Not for whatever it is you believe about duty and country and the greater good. She held his gaze. I don't trust men who keep secrets. I know, he said. And I don't intend to start. I would not expect you to, he said. Miss Whitmore. He stopped, started again. Clara. She stiffened slightly at the use of her given name. He noticed. We will need to practice that, he said without apology. If this is to be convincing, we cannot address each other like we are strangers at a church meeting. She pressed her lips together. Nathaniel, she said, flatly, with all the warmth of a legal document. Something happened at the corner of his mouth again. That almost smile, gone before she could confirm it. That will do, he said, for a beginning. He extended his hand across the desk. She looked at it for a moment, large calloused across the palm in the particular way of a man who had held weapons and ropes and oars, and then she placed her gloved hand in his. His grip was firm and brief and entirely professional. 3 weeks, she said. 3 weeks, he agreed. She withdrew her hand, walked to the door, opened it. The noise of the party rushed back in warm and bright and entirely disconnected from what had just happened in this room. She paused in the doorway. Mr. Carter, she said, because she could not help it. Yes, he said. For what it's worth, she said. I had absolutely no evidence for my earlier assessment of you. There was a silence. I know, he said. She thought she was almost certain that she heard something in his voice that might under very different circumstances have been called amusement. She went back to the party. The next morning, Nathaniel Carter sent her flowers. 12 white roses. Not red, she noted this and filed it away. White, whatever that meant. The card read in handwriting that was surprisingly clean, and even for a man who claimed to have spent years on ships, for Miss Clara Whitmore, with apologies for the disruption to her evening. I hope you are well. N.C. Her father saw the flowers at breakfast. He looked at them for a long time. Then he looked at Clara. Then he looked at his coffee. Are you certain about this? He said. I am not certain about anything, she said honestly. But we are doing it regardless. He was quiet. Then, he is a good man. I know you won't believe that, but he is. How long have you known him? Her father wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. He came to me in the winter, told me what he knew, what Prescott had done. He shook his head. Most men would have used that information as leverage. God knows Prescott would. Carter just told me. Said he wanted to help put it right. Clara thought about the man in the library. The way he had sat down to make himself less imposing. The way he had let silences sit without filling them. The way he had said I would not ask it if there were another way, and meant it. She still did not trust him. But she had begun to notice the difference between the man and his reputation, and she was not sure yet what to do with that. The second delivery came 2 days later. Not flowers. A book. A collection of botanical illustrations with a note. Margaret tells me you prefer books to flowers. I hope this is more suitable. N. C. Clara sat with the book in her lap for a moment. Then she looked across the parlor at her younger sister, who was trying very hard to appear uninterested in needlework. You spoke to him, Clara said. He asked. Her sister said simply. He wanted to know what you actually liked. Clara looked back at the book. She did not like that he had asked. She did not like that she liked that he had asked. She opened the book and began to read, and tried not to think about the fact that he had sent the right thing. The arrangement became public on a Thursday. This was because Nathaniel Carter arrived at the Whitmore house on Thursday morning on horseback in a coat that cost more than most families in the county spent on food in a month, and asked Clara to walk with him in the market. Clara walked with him in the market. She was aware of every head that turned. She was aware of Mrs. Halcourt across the street, frozen with a basket of tomatoes in her hands and her mouth slightly open. She was aware of the Prescott girl 3 stalls down, who went entirely still for a moment and then laughed very brightly at nothing. She was aware of Nathaniel beside her, one hand at the small of her back, barely touching the lightest possible contact that still somehow communicated she is with me to anyone watching. "You're causing a considerable scene," she murmured. "That is the intention," he said. "Half this town will be discussing this by nightfall." "More than half," he said. "I am not frequently seen in markets. The novelty alone will keep them talking for a week." She glanced at him sideways. He was scanning the street with those gray eyes, cataloging everything, missing nothing. The soldier in him, she thought, or whoever he had become after the war. "Did you choose Thursday deliberately?" she asked. "Prescott attends his club on Thursday mornings," he said. "He will hear about this by the afternoon from 4 different sources, all of whom will tell him something slightly different. That ambiguity is useful. You've thought about this very carefully." "I think about most things carefully," he said. A woman passed them on the right. Mrs. Davies, who had 3 daughters and a relentless determination to match them with prosperity. She looked at Clara with an expression that moved through surprise, approval, and something very close to calculation, all in the space of 3 seconds. "Mrs. Davies?" Nathaniel said, and tipped his hat. Mrs. Davies nearly dropped her parasol. Clara kept her face perfectly neutral. "You did that on purpose." "She will tell 7 people before noon," he said. "It's efficient." Clara pressed her lips together very hard to prevent a smile. "You are a deeply strange man, Mr. Carter." "Nathaniel," he said. "Nathaniel," she said, and this time it came out less like a legal document. She felt him glance at her sideways, brief, almost imperceptible. They walked the length of the market. He bought her nothing she had not wanted him to, and she suspected he knew that. He simply walked beside her close enough that the message was clear and spoke to her about neutral things, the quality of the local corn crop. A new road being planned between here and Richmond, an opinion about the morning's weather that was more nuanced than any weather opinion had a right to be. He was, she realized, genuinely good at conversation when he chose to engage in it. She found this inconvenient. At the end of the market before they parted, he leaned toward her slightly. Anyone watching would have thought he was murmuring something romantic. What he actually said was, "Prescott has been invited to the Beaumont dinner on Saturday. I will attend. I need you there as well. And at the dinner, I need to get into his coat. He carries a key on him. I have reason to believe it opens a box at the cottage." She looked straight ahead, smiled slightly for the benefit of anyone watching. "You need to pick his pocket." "I need access to a very specific pocket," he said. "Yes." "And how does my presence at the dinner facilitate this?" "Because," he said, "when you leave the dinner party early, he will be the one who notices you go. And while he is noticing you, I will have approximately 90 seconds. She processed this. "You want me to make a scene?" "I want you to leave," he said, quietly. "The scene will happen because people will watch. That is sufficient." She tilted her head slightly. "And if Prescott comes after me to be courteous, he is famously courteous." "I will be faster," Nathaniel said. There was something in the way he said it. Quiet and absolute. Not a boast. Just a fact about himself that he had apparently confirmed at some previous point, under circumstances she was not sure she wanted to know about. "Saturday," she said. "Saturday," he agreed. He stepped back, tipped his hat to her, said in a voice perfectly calibrated for any observer, "Miss Whitmore, it has been a great pleasure. Until Saturday." And then he walked away, back straight, not looking back. Clara stood in the market for a moment longer. She thought about the botanical book, the white roses, the way he had sat down at the desk in the library. She thought about the way he had said, "She is with me," with nothing more than the position of his hand. She did not trust him. But she was beginning to suspect that he might be exactly what he appeared to be underneath everything else. And that somehow was more unsettling than if he had been lying. She turned and walked home, and did not let herself think about it further until she was safely inside. Then she sat in the window where the light came in sideways, and thought about it quite a lot. The ballroom had witnessed her most careless moment. The library had witnessed the bargain. The market had launched the lie. But it was the cottage and what waited inside it that would change everything. And Nathaniel Carter, who had not smiled in 4 years, was beginning to understand that he had made a very serious miscalculation. He had expected an arrangement. He had not expected Clara Whitmore. Saturday arrived the way bad decisions always did, too quickly, and with the particular brightness of a summer morning that made everything feel more exposed than it should. Clara dressed carefully. Not to impress, to perform. She chose the deep blue gown because her mother had once said it made her look like a woman who could not be rattled. She needed that tonight. She needed every advantage she could manufacture and pin to her own body before walking into a room with William Prescott. Her sister fastened the last button at her back and said nothing, which meant she knew something was happening and had decided not to ask. Clara loved her for that. The Beaumont dinner was held at the largest private residence in the county, and by the time Clara arrived in the family carriage, the drive was already crowded. Lanterns lit the path, voices spilled from the open windows, and somewhere inside, she knew Nathaniel Carter was already positioned, watching every entrance, cataloging every exit, calculating angles she had not yet thought to consider. She went inside. He found her in 4 minutes. She knew because she counted. He appeared at her elbow the way he always did, quietly, without ceremony, as if he had simply materialized from the space beside her and had always been intending to stand there. "You're late," he said low enough that only she could hear. "I am precisely on time," she said. "You arrived early." "I always arrive early." "Of course you do." She accepted a glass from a passing servant and did not drink from it. "Where is he?" "Northeast corner, talking to Judge Harland. He has been there for 11 minutes. He paused. "He looked at the door when you walked in." Clara felt something cold slide through her. "Did he recognize me?" "He knows who you are," Nathaniel said. "What he doesn't know yet is why you're here with me." "Then let's give him a reason to wonder," she said. She turned toward him just slightly, just enough that anyone watching would see her lean into the conversation, see the way her shoulder angled toward him, see the small private smile she manufactured with everything she had. It was, she acknowledged privately, a very good smile. She had used it before on men who deserved it less. Nathaniel looked at her for a half-second with an expression she could not read. Then he covered it and said quietly, "He's watching." "I know," she said. "Keep talking." "About what?" "Anything. Say something that makes you look like a man in the early stages of losing his composure over a woman." There was a silence that lasted exactly long enough to become interesting. "That," Nathaniel said, "may be more difficult than picking a pocket." And Clara laughed, a real laugh startled out of her before she could manage it, and she saw from the corner of her eye the way Prescott's gaze sharpened across the room. Good. Let him look. Let him wonder what Nathaniel Carter had said to make Clara Whitmore laugh like that. The dinner proceeded in stages, the way these things always did. Cocktails, seating soup fish, the long, slow advance toward the main course, while conversation moved around the table like a river finding its lowest point. Clara was seated 4 chairs from Nathaniel, which was by design. They had agreed proximity without attachment. Near enough to seem connected, far enough to avoid the appearance of desperation. Prescott was seated directly across from her. He was, she had to admit, exactly what everyone said he was. Polished, attentive. He had the quality some men possessed of making you feel when he spoke to you that you were the most interesting person in the room. She had met men like that before. They were always the most dangerous kind. "Miss Whitmore," he said somewhere between the fish and the roast. "I was not aware you were acquainted with Mr. Carter." "We became acquainted recently," she said. "Recently," he repeated as if tasting the word. "He is not a man who becomes acquainted with people easily." "No," she agreed pleasantly. "He is not." Prescott smiled. It was a wonderful smile. She wanted to scrape it off his face. "You must be quite remarkable then. to have broken through. She met his eyes and held them. I simply didn't let him be indifferent. Some men respond to that. She heard from 4 chairs down the infinitesimal sound of Nathaniel setting down his fork. Prescott chuckled. How refreshing. Most women in this county are rather afraid of him. I am not most women in this county, Clara said. No, Prescott said, studying her. I am beginning to see that. She smiled at him and reached for her water glass, and under the table pressed her fingers together very hard until the urge to say something unwise had passed. Nathaniel said nothing for the rest of the first course, nothing for the second. Clara did not look at him directly, but she was aware of him the entire time, the way you were aware of a fire burning at the edge of a room not from seeing it, but from the warmth it threw. At 40 minutes past the hour, Clara set her napkin beside her plate. She rose quietly with the unhurried motion of a woman who simply needed a moment of air. She said nothing to the table. She simply left. Behind her, she heard conversation stutter briefly, and then recover. She heard distinctly the sound of a chair adjusting. She walked through the hall, through the front parlor, out the side door that led onto the garden. She stood in the summer dark and counted her heartbeats, and waited. 47 seconds. The side door opened behind her. She turned, expecting Prescott. It was Nathaniel. He held up a small brass key between 2 fingers. She stared at it, then at him. 90 seconds, she said. 78, he said. He was easier to distract than I expected. What distracted him? Something moved through his expression. You did, he said. He watched you leave for 12 full seconds before he remembered where he was. Clara absorbed that. That's unsettling. Yes, Nathaniel agreed, and his voice had shifted into something harder. It is. He slipped the key into his coat pocket. We need to return. You first. 2 minutes apart. She nodded, turned to go. Clara. She stopped at the sound of her own name in his voice. He so rarely used it, and she was not yet accustomed to the way it sounded. You did well in there, he said. And it was not praise exactly. It was simply accurate, the way he said most things. I know, she said, and went back inside. She was reseated before the dessert course arrived. Prescott returned approximately 2 minutes later. He did not look at her when he sat. He was, she thought, recalibrating something. Nathaniel rejoined the table 4 minutes after that. He spoke twice during dessert, once about the condition of the Richmond roads, and once in response to a question about shipping routes along the James River. He did not look at Clara, but when the evening ended and the carriages were being called, he materialized beside her coat before she reached for it and held it open with the ease of a man who had not had to think about the gesture. She slipped her arms in. His hands settled briefly at her shoulders, adjusting the collar, she realized, with the precise efficiency of someone who had been watching the way it had sat crooked since the soup course. Thursday, he murmured near her ear. The cottage. I'll send word about the time. How many people will know where we're going? No one, he said. That is why we need a reason that no one questions. She thought about that. The coat settled warm around her. What reason did you have in mind? I thought, he said just above a whisper, that you might want to retrieve your mother's garden tools. She went very still. She had mentioned the rose garden exactly once. To her sister, at breakfast 3 days ago. She turned her head slightly. He was close, the nearness required for the pretense of intimacy, and when she turned, she could see the line of his jaw, the slight tension there. You asked my sister about me again, she said. I asked what had been left in the cottage, he said. She told me about the garden. The tools were my mother's, Clara said quietly. I know, he said. That is why it will work. Because it will be true. She faced forward again. The hall around them was full of departing guests and called carriages, and the particular social noise of an evening's end, and she was standing in the middle of it with her mother's ghost between her shoulder blades and a man she did not trust telling her something that made more sense than anything she had wanted it to. "Thursday," she said. "Thursday," he confirmed. She walked to her carriage. She did not look back, but she thought about the garden tools the entire way home. And she thought about the fact that he had thought to ask. She did not sleep well that night. She told herself it was because of Prescott's eyes across the dinner table. The way they had tracked her. The way he had smiled as if he already knew something she didn't. She told herself it was not because of Nathaniel Carter's hands settling the collar of her coat. She was moderately convincing, even to herself. Thursday came in 3 days, and the heat with it, the heavy, wet Virginia summer heat that sat on your skin and made everything feel slower and more urgent at the same time. The kind of heat that made people say things they shouldn't and mean things they hadn't planned to. Nathaniel arrived at the Whitmore house at 9 in the morning with a small open carriage and an expression that said he had been awake for several hours already, which she was beginning to understand was simply his default condition. Her father met him at the door. Clara watched from the hall as the two of them shook hands. Her father was thinner than she remembered. He had been thinner every time she looked at him recently, as if the weight of what he carried was becoming visible in his body. He said something to Nathaniel she couldn't hear, and Nathaniel nodded once, and her father looked at the floor for a moment, and then back up and said something else. Nathaniel put his hand briefly on her father's shoulder. Her father straightened slightly. Not much, but it was something. Clara turned away because she did not want to cry in the hallway before 9 o'clock in the morning. The drive to the cottage took 20 minutes. They did not speak for the first 5. "What did my father say to you?" she asked, when the silence had accumulated enough weight that she had to address it. "He thanked me," Nathaniel said. "For what?" "For taking care of you." A pause. His words, "I take care of myself," Clara said. "I told him that," Nathaniel said. "He said he knew. He thanked me anyway." She looked at the road, at the way the morning light came through the trees in long golden shafts that were beautiful and entirely beside the point. "He feels guilty." Yes. He shouldn't. He was deceived by someone very practiced at deception. Guilt, Nathaniel said, does not respond to logic either. She glanced at him. He was watching the road with that particular focus he brought to everything, that quality of attention that made her feel sometimes that he was never entirely in one place, but always partially somewhere else, running calculations she couldn't see. "You said that before," she said, "about fear not responding to logic." "It's generally true of the things that matter most," he said. "What are you afraid of then?" she asked. The question came out before she had fully decided to ask it. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he would not answer. Then he said, "Failing people who were counting on me." She sat with that for a moment. "Has that happened before?" "Yes," he said, "just that. No elaboration." But the word had a weight to it that told her the story was long and that he had no intention of telling it today. She did not push. She was not sure she was ready to know. The cottage appeared at the end of the lane, and whatever she had been about to say dissolved in the sudden realization that they were here, and that this was no longer an arrangement described in a library. It was real and happening, and William Prescott's belongings were inside her family's walls. She felt Nathaniel go very still beside her, not with tension exactly, with readiness. "Anyone here?" she asked. "No," he said. "Prescott is in Richmond until tomorrow. I confirmed this morning." He glanced at her. "Are you ready?" Clara looked at the cottage, at the window where her mother used to set potted herbs on the sill, at the front step where she had learned to ride a horse at age 6 on a pony that was too small for her father, but perfect for her. "No," she said honestly. "But we're doing it regardless." Something crossed his face, the not-quite smile gone before she could confirm it. They went inside. The cottage had been changed. Not completely. The bones were the same. The particular lean of the hallway, the sound the third floorboard made, but it had been occupied in a way that covered the family underneath. New furniture in the sitting room, documents on the writing desk, the smell of a different man's pipe tobacco, Clara went immediately to the kitchen garden at the back, because that was what they had said she would do. Retrieve her mother's tools, be visible in case anyone was watching from the road. Nathaniel went for the study. She found the tools where she had known they'd be hanging on the wooden pegs on the garden wall. Her mother had painted each handle with a small red stripe so they could be identified. The paint was faded, but still there. She took them down one by one and held them and did not let herself cry and counted the minutes. 8 minutes passed, then 9. He had said 15. She told herself 15 was fine. 12 minutes. She went back inside. The study door was still closed. 13 minutes. She knocked twice. "Are you?" The door opened. Nathaniel stood in the frame with a folder of papers in one hand and an expression she had never seen on his face before. "What is it?" she said. "I need you to look at something," he said, "and I need you to tell me if you recognize the name on this document." He held out a single page. She took it. It was a contract. Dense handwriting, formal language, the kind of legal architecture that had been designed to be hard to read at speed. She read it slowly, eyes tracking down the page. She found the name at the bottom. The world went very quiet. "That can't be right," she said. "I found it in the second drawer," Nathaniel said, "behind a false panel." She looked at the name again, as if looking at it longer might change it. It did not change. "This is in my family's name," she said. Her voice sounded very far away to her own ears. "This contract, this is in my family's name, which means my family signed it, which means, Nathaniel said carefully, that someone in your family was not simply a victim of Prescott's scheme." Clara looked up from the page. She met his eyes. "My father didn't know about this," she said. "I believe that," he said. "Then someone else signed it." Her voice had gone flat. Controlled. The voice she used when things were very wrong and falling apart, and she needed to hold herself together by force of will. "Someone else in my family. Someone who had access to the family documents and was close enough to Prescott to—" She stopped. "Who else knew about my father's situation? Who else would have had access?" Nathaniel said nothing, because he already knew, and in the silence, so did she. Clara sat down on the edge of the desk, which was Prescott's desk, now, which made her feel sick, but her legs had made the decision before she had. "My uncle," she said. "The signature matches documents I have from him through county records," Nathaniel said. "I'm sorry. He was my father's closest advisor," she said. "He handled half the family business after my mother died. She stopped, pressed her lips together, started again. "He told my father which investments to trust. He was the one who introduced my father to Prescott in the first place." "Yes," Nathaniel said. "He didn't fall into a scheme," she said. "He built one, together with Prescott. From what I can reconstruct, yes. Your uncle was the mechanism. He identified the targets, families with assets and aging patriarchs and not enough oversight. Prescott provided the contracts and the capital and the connections. Your uncle provided access." "And my father never suspected," she said. "Your father trusted him," Nathaniel said simply. The unfairness of it hit her all at once like something physical. Her father, who was too soft and too trusting, and who gambled because he could not bear the anxiety of uncertainty, and who had spent the last year aged 20 years by guilt, had been betrayed not by a stranger or an enemy, but by his own brother, his own blood. The man who had sat at their table and asked after their mother's health and helped Clara with her Latin lessons at age 12. "Does he know we're here?" Clara asked. "My uncle. Does he know what we're doing?" "I don't believe so," Nathaniel said. "But if Prescott suspects anything, if the dinner the other night put him on alert, your uncle will know by the time Prescott does." Clara stood up. "Then we're running out of time." "Yes," he said. "Which is why I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." She looked at him. "Your uncle keeps a separate office," Nathaniel said, "at the county building. He has a private room there. I have not been able to gain access because there is no legitimate reason for me to enter. But you." "I can get in," she said. "He's my family. No one would question it." "Are you able to do that?" Nathaniel said. "Knowing what you know now. Looking at him. Sitting across from him and not—" "Yes," she said. "Clara." "Yes," she said again harder. "I can do it. He did this to my father. He did this to our family. He sat at our table, Nathaniel." The name came out without her thinking about it. She was too far past thinking. "He sat at our table and ate our food and watched my father fall apart and knew exactly why. So yes, I can walk into his office and smile at him and find whatever is in there." She met Nathaniel's eyes. "I come from a family of men who are very good at pretending. It turns out I inherited something from them after all." Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. She could not tell if he was calculating or concerned or something else entirely. "We leave now," he said. "We leave now," she agreed. They gathered everything, the papers, the folder, her mother's garden tools, and were back in the carriage before 15 minutes had passed total. On the drive back, neither of them spoke for a long time. Then Nathaniel said quietly, "For what it's worth, what you're doing for your family. The risk of it. I want you to know I don't take it lightly." Clara looked at the road, at the long pale dust of it stretching back toward home. "I know you don't," she said. "I know I'm not someone you trust," he said. It was not self-pity, just accuracy, the way everything he said was accurate. "You're someone I trust more than I did a week ago," she said. "That's not nothing." He didn't answer. But she felt the quality of his silence change the way a room's feeling changes, when someone in it relaxes slightly, almost imperceptible, but there. "The tools," he said after another minute. "The red stripes." She glanced at him. "Your mother painted them," he said, not a question. "Yes," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "My mother kept a garden too, before she died." He paused. "I pulled it up afterward. I couldn't look at it." Clara absorbed this, said nothing for a moment. "How old were you?" 14, he said. She thought about a 14-year-old boy pulling up his dead mother's garden because looking at it was unbearable, and she thought about a 32-year-old man who still apparently had not found anything to replace the things he had torn out by the roots, and she thought this was possibly the most he had told anyone about himself in a very long time. "I nearly left the tools," she said. "When I saw them, I almost couldn't touch them." "But you did," he said. "But I did," she agreed. Another silence, but a different kind, the kind that had something breathing in it. "Nathaniel," she said. "Yes," he said. "My uncle's name is Edmund Whitmore," she said. "He is in his office every Friday between 10 and noon, and he expects family visits because it flatters him. I will go on Friday." "I'll arrange a reason to be nearby," he said. "I don't need you nearby." "I know," he said. "I'll be there anyway." She looked at him. At the profile of him, the jaw, the straight line of the nose, the eyes fixed ahead. The soldier who had come home with fewer words than he left with, and had built something enormous out of silence and discipline, and she was beginning to understand a very specific and private kind of grief. She had called him the worst kisser in America in a candlelit ballroom a week and a half ago. She found this memory deeply inconvenient now. She faced forward. "Friday," she said. "Friday," he confirmed. And then the Whitmore house came into view at the end of the lane, and Clara carried her mother's tools inside and set them in the kitchen where they belonged, and stood in the room for a long moment before she moved again. Her father found her there. He looked at the tools, then at her face. "Are you all right?" he asked. "No," she said. And for once with him, she did not pretend. "But I will be." He put his arm around her shoulders the way he used to when she was small, when the world had been simpler and promises had meant more. She let him. She was very tired, and the week had not yet finished, and there was a man with her uncle's face who had destroyed her family from the inside, and a man in a dark coat who was beginning to feel like the only solid thing in a room that kept shifting. She stood in her mother's kitchen, with her mother's tools, and her father's arm around her shoulders, and allowed herself exactly 60 seconds of not being the woman who held everything together. Then she straightened, stepped back, smiled at her father, a smaller, truer smile than the ones she manufactured for ballrooms and dinner tables. "I'm going to make this right," she said. He looked at her for a long time. "I know," he said quietly. "I know you are." She went upstairs. She had 3 days until Friday. She was going to need them. Friday came the way all difficult things came, with beautiful weather, and no warning, and an absolute indifference to the fact that Clara had barely slept in 3 days. She dressed plainly. Not the blue gown. Not anything that announced itself. A gray morning dress. Her hair pulled back, simply the kind of appearance that said, "Family visit." Nothing remarkable to anyone who happened to see her walk into the county building on a Friday morning before noon. She had rehearsed the conversation with her uncle 47 times in her head. She had a reason for the visit. She needed him to review the language in a small inheritance document related to her mother's personal belongings. Something she had drafted herself specifically for this purpose. Something dense enough that he would spend real time on it, something that would keep his eyes down and his hands occupied. Nathaniel had reviewed the document Wednesday evening. He had changed 2 phrases and said the rest was excellent. She had not told him she was flattered. She had filed it away instead in the same private drawer where she kept everything she noticed about him that she had not yet decided what to do with. Edmund Whitmore's office was at the far end of the second corridor, past 3 other doors, and a clerk who recognized Clara immediately and smiled and waved her through without question. That was the thing about family access. It was effortless, invisible, exactly what Prescott had relied on. She knocked, opened the door, smiled. "Uncle Edmund," she said. He was behind his desk, a large man, her uncle heavier than her father, and slower with the particular prosperity that settled into the bodies of men who had been comfortable for a long time. He had her father's eyes, which she had always found confusing, because her father's eyes were kind, and she was no longer sure what kind meant when applied to this face. Clara. He rose pleased. He was always pleased when family visited. It was she now understood, because family confirmed the story he told about himself, successful man, devoted uncle, pillar of the community. What a surprise! Sit down, sit down. She sat. She handed him the document. She explained the question about her mother's personal belongings, with just the right amount of uncertainty, not enough to seem stupid enough to seem like she needed guidance. He took the document, put on his reading glasses, bent over it, and Clara looked around the office. Not quickly, not with her eyes moving the way a person's eyes moved when they were looking for something. She had practiced this too, the art of looking at a room as if you were simply comfortable in it, simply letting your gaze settle and lift and settle again, the way a woman did when she was waiting for a man to finish reading. 2 filing cabinets against the left wall. Locked, she could see the keyholes. A bookcase behind him, which she dismissed immediately because there was nothing in a visible bookcase that a man wanted to hide. A second desk in the corner, smaller, older, pushed slightly sideways, as if it was being kept out of the way. She looked at the second desk. There was a scratch on the surface. Recent, she thought, the woodlighter underneath. And the leg on the right side had been repaired, new hardware, different color than the original. She looked away. "This clause here," her uncle said, tapping the document, "is slightly ambiguous. You'll want to specify whether the personal effects include items stored versus items in active use at the time of death." "I thought that might be unclear," Clara said, leaning forward to look. "What would you suggest?" he explained. She listened. She asked a follow-up question that required him to explain again. He did so without impatience. He liked explaining things she had always known, that had once found it comforting, now found it revealing. A man who liked to explain things liked to believe he knew more than the people around him. He had built his entire career on exactly that belief. 20 minutes. She needed 20 minutes, and she had given Nathaniel the window. "There's also the question of the family silver," she said when the document explanation wound down. Father was asking whether the pieces Mother specified in her letter qualify as personal effects or household property, because there's a difference in... Oh, that's a longer question, her uncle said, and settled back into his chair with the satisfaction of a man who had been handed more time to be useful. Let me think through the relevant precedent. He thought. He talked. He referenced 2 cases and 1 county ruling from 1809. Clara counted the minutes. 14 minutes and the door opened without a knock. She turned. Nathaniel Carter stood in the doorframe. She had known he would be in the building. She had not known he would come in. Her uncle looked up, and his expression did the thing she had been watching for since she sat down. It moved in less than half a second from surprise to something else. Something controlled too quickly, replaced too efficiently by a smile. "Mr. Carter," her uncle said, "I wasn't aware we had a meeting today." "We don't," Nathaniel said. He came into the room and closed the door. He did not look at Clara, which meant he was very aware of her. "I was in the building on other business. I saw Miss Whitmore's carriage outside." He glanced at Clara, with the particular expression he had been practicing in public, warm with an edge of something private. "You didn't mention you were coming in today." "It was a family matter," Clara said. "I didn't want to bother you." "Nothing you do bothers me," he said. Her uncle was watching them with the focused attention of a man rearranging his understanding of a situation. "I was not aware you two were acquainted," he said. "We've been acquainted for some time," Nathaniel said, taking the chair beside Clara with the ease of a man who had been invited. He hadn't been. Her uncle noticed. She watched him notice. "Well," her uncle said, and smiled, and the smile was perfect. It was always perfect. "What a pleasant coincidence. Shall I have tea sent up?" "Please don't trouble yourself," Clara said. "We were nearly finished." She reached for the document. "You were saying about the 1809 ruling." Her uncle looked at the document, then at Nathaniel, then back. "Yes," he said. "The ruling." He resumed. But something in the room had shifted, and all 3 of them knew it, and none of them said so. Nathaniel contributed nothing to the legal discussion. He sat beside Clara in a silence that somehow managed to communicate, "I belong here, and I am watching you simultaneously," and she understood in the part of her mind that was not occupied with looking attentive that this was deliberate. He had come in, not because he needed to, but because he wanted to see her uncle's face when Nathaniel Carter was in the room. He was reading something in her uncle's reaction. She didn't know what yet. 18 minutes in, her uncle said something that stopped her cold. He had been explaining the distinction between personal effects and household property, and he said quite casually, "Of course, if the Whitmore estate is still in question at the time of any legal action, you'd want to sort the property matter with Prescott's people first, before any of this is relevant." Clara's hand was very still on the arm of her chair. "With Prescott's people?" she repeated. Carefully, neutrally. "Well, yes." Her uncle shuffled the document. "I assumed your father had told you. The Eastern property situation it may have some downstream implications for." "Father told me some of it," she said. "Not all, I think." "No, well." Her uncle sighed, and she heard in it genuine regret, which made everything worse. Because real regret required actual conscience, and she had been hoping he had none left. "It's a complicated situation. William has been very generous about the timeline considering." "Very generous," Clara said. "He's a good man," her uncle said. "I know his reputation in some quarters is, but he has been very patient with the family, and that matters," Nathaniel said quietly. "How long have you known Mr. Prescott? Mr. Whitmore?" Her uncle looked at him. "Oh, some years now. We were introduced through mutual business interests. Why do you ask?" "I've been looking at some of his shipping contracts," Nathaniel said pleasantly. "In my own professional capacity. Interesting terms." Something happened behind her uncle's eyes. Gone in an instant. "I wouldn't know much about shipping contracts," her uncle said. "No, of course not," Nathaniel said. "That's my territory." He smiled. It was the first full smile she had ever seen from him, and it did not reach his eyes at all, and it was, she thought, one of the more frightening things she had witnessed. Her uncle laughed, a small, careful laugh. "Well, I'm sure you know what you're looking at better than I do." "I generally do," Nathaniel said. They left 6 minutes later. Her uncle walked them to the door himself, which he did not usually do for family visits. He shook Nathaniel's hand at the threshold, held it a half-second longer than necessary. "Lovely to see you, Clara," he said. "You too, Uncle," she said, and kissed his cheek, and felt the smile on her own face like a mask made of paper. They were in the corridor before either of them spoke. "Second desk," Clara said very quietly. "Corner of the room, recent damage, repaired hardware." "I saw it," Nathaniel said. "There's something under it, or in it." "I know." He said nothing further until they were outside at the edge of the steps, where the noise of the street covered conversation. "Your uncle is more frightened than I expected." "You came in to test him," she said. "Yes." "And he knows something is moving," Nathaniel said. "He doesn't know exactly what, but he's been watching Prescott's situation closely enough that he's aware the edges are beginning to loosen." He paused. "He'll warn Prescott, probably by tonight." Clara felt the timeline compress. "Which means whatever is in that desk will be moved by morning," he said, "or destroyed." She looked at him. "Then we need to go back." "Tonight," he said, "after he's gone home." "Breaking into a county office," she said. "Retrieving evidence of fraud," he said. "The framing matters." "It's still breaking in." "Yes," he agreed. "It is." He held her gaze. "You don't have to come." "He's my uncle," she said. "I know which window on the east side of the building doesn't latch properly. I know this because I used to climb out of it as a child when he watched me after school and bored me beyond endurance." She paused. "You do in fact need me." Nathaniel Carter looked at her for a long moment. "Clara," he said. "Don't," she said. "Don't tell me it's too dangerous or that you can manage without me or anything else that is both kind and wrong. We go tonight. That's what we do." He was quiet. Then, "The window on the east side. Third from the end," she said. "Takes 2 hands and a particular angle." "How old were you?" 9, she said. "I wanted to go watch the horses at the farrier's." He made a sound she had not heard from him before. Low, brief, entirely involuntary. She realized after a moment that it was a laugh. She stared at him. He had already recovered. But it had happened. She had heard it, and it could not be taken back. "Tonight," he said. 11 o'clock. I'll meet you at the east corner." She nodded. She walked to her carriage. She sat in it the entire drive home with the feeling of that sound in her chest, brief and low and completely unguarded, and she told herself it meant nothing. She was not convincing at all. The night was very dark when she slipped out of the Whitmore house at 10:30. The kind of dark that was a blessing when you were trying not to be seen, and a liability when you were trying not to break your ankle on the road. Nathaniel was at the corner before she arrived. Of course he was. He looked at her. The plain dark clothing, the practical boots, the fact that her hair was already pinned close to her head, and said nothing except, "This way." The county building was dark and still. 2 other structures on the street had night watchmen. The county building, she had confirmed, did not. Her uncle had always considered it unnecessary. This, she thought grimly, had finally turned useful. The east window was exactly as she remembered it. Third from the end. Nathaniel tested the latch with 2 fingers and looked at her. 2 hands, she said, and push in at the top before you pull up at the bottom. He did this. The window opened. "You are occasionally very useful," he said. "Occasionally," she agreed. He went through first. This was not negotiable, and she did not argue it. She followed. They were in the filing corridor of the 2nd floor, which smelled of old paper and summer heat, and the particular staleness of rooms that were used during the day and abandoned at night. They moved without speaking. She knew this building. She let that knowledge carry them right at the T-junction's second door on the left, the board that creaked under the window, the way the third door stuck in humidity and had to be lifted slightly to open. Her uncle's office. Nathaniel went directly to the second desk in the corner. Clara stayed near the door, listening. She heard him try the top drawer. Locked. She heard the particular sound of a man who knew how to open locked drawers working through it methodically. She had not asked where he learned that. She was adding it to the list of things about Nathaniel Carter that she knew without explanation. The drawer opened. Silence. Then, Clara. His voice was very quiet, very controlled. The voice he used when something was worse than he expected. She crossed to him. He was holding a document, a long one, multiple pages with a government seal at the top that she recognized, the same seal she had seen on papers that came to her father from Washington the year the war ended. She read the first page standing beside him in the dark, with no candle. The moonlight through the window, the only light, and her eyes adjusting and her heart rate climbing, because what she was reading was not a land contract. It was not a financial scheme. It was a list of names, soldiers' names she thought, and shipping routes and dates from 1813 and 1814, and a set of figures that were not money amounts because they were too precise for money, and not measurements, because they were followed by letters she associated with military dispatches. "What is this?" she said. Not a question. She knew what it was. She needed someone else to say it. "Your uncle," Nathaniel said with a quietness that was more frightening than anger, was not simply helping Prescott steal from Virginia families. She looked up at him. "He was providing troop movement information during the war," Nathaniel said, "through Prescott's shipping network, to British contacts." The word landed in the room and stayed there. "That's treason," Clara said. "Yes," Nathaniel said. She thought about her father, about the way his hands had shaken in that letter, about the 12 years of Sunday mornings with his brother at their table, about the kindness her uncle had performed so consistently, so convincingly for so long. She thought about the soldiers on those lists, the ones who had moved through routes her uncle had charted and her uncle had given away. How many people knew about this, she said. Very few, Nathaniel said. Prescott knew. He was the conduit. A handful of others, I suspect, who I have not yet identified. He paused. I came to Virginia looking for a financial fraud, and I have found something considerably larger. That's why Washington sent you, she said. This wasn't about the land contracts. The land contracts were real, he said. They were also a useful side enterprise for Prescott, and a useful cover for me to investigate without revealing the larger target. She stared at him. You knew about the treason already. I suspected. And you came here, and you built this arrangement, and you let me believe this was about my father's land. Your father's land is real, he said, and his voice held something careful and urgent. The danger to your family is real. I did not mislead you about that. But you didn't tell me everything. No, he said. I did not. The silence between them had a different quality now. Not the breathing kind, the held breath kind. Why? She said. Because you thought I couldn't handle it. Because, he said, and she heard the truth in it before she processed the words, the more you knew, the more dangerous it was for you. I was trying to protect you by limiting what you carried. That was not your decision to make, she said. No, he said. It wasn't. She turned away from him. She needed a moment that he was not in. She thought about the soldiers on that list, the routes, the dates. 1813, the year her cousin had come home from the war, missing 2 fingers and unable to sleep for a year. She thought about whether his route had been on that paper. She thought about the particular cruelty of not knowing. She turned back. Take everything, she said. Every page, every document in this drawer that relates to Prescott, or to the war, or to any name on those lists. Clara. Take it, she said. All of it. And then we go to Washington ourselves. Not through a letter, not through intermediaries. You tell me who in the federal government you trust, and we take this directly to them, and we make sure my uncle does not have time to run. Nathaniel looked at her for a moment. "You understand that this changes everything for your family," he said. "When this comes out, your uncle's involvement, it will be public. Your name. Your father's name." "My father did nothing wrong," she said. "People will not immediately distinguish that." "Then we make sure they do," she said. "We document the deception. We prove that my father was a target, not a participant. We show exactly how the scheme worked and who built it, and that the Whitmore family were its victims, not its architects." She looked at him steadily. "You have enough contacts to make that narrative the one that travels first, don't you?" He held her gaze. "Yes," he said after a moment. "I do." "Then that is what we do," she said. "We control what people hear first. And we go to Washington within the week." Nathaniel was quiet for 5 full seconds, which was a very long time for a man who made decisions quickly. "Within the week," he said. "Yes." He reached back into the drawer and gathered everything. She helped him sort it, both of them working in the near dark with quiet efficiency, and she was struck not for the first time by how naturally they moved in the same space, how little they got in each other's way. How his hand reached for something, and she had already moved to give him room, and her hand reached for something, and he had already cleared the path. She filed this observation away with everything else. They were back through the window and across the street and into the shadow of the trees before the quarter hour. He was carrying the documents. She was carrying the weight of what they contained. "Nathaniel," she said when they had put sufficient distance between themselves and the building. He stopped, turned. "Were you ever going to tell me," she said, "about the treason? If we had gotten to the end of this without my finding it tonight, would you have told me?" He held her gaze in the dark and did not look away. "I don't know," he said. And the honesty of it, the refusal to give her a comfortable answer, was somehow the most trustworthy thing he had said to her. She nodded once, accepted it. "We need to talk about the journey to Washington." "I'll arrange it," he said. 3 days. I need to send ahead." "And my father? What do you want to tell him?" She thought about this, about her father's shaking hands and his guilt that didn't respond to logic, and the 60 seconds she had allowed herself in the kitchen. "Everything," she said. "I am done managing what my father knows about his own life." Nathaniel looked at her and said nothing, and she thought she saw something shift in him. Not approval exactly. Something larger and quieter than approval. "I'll be at your house tomorrow morning," he said. 8 o'clock. 7, she said. A beat. 7. He agreed. She walked home. The night was still thick and warm, and the frogs were loud near the creek. She went inside, went upstairs, stood at the window in the upper hall where the light came in sideways during the day and was just dark now, a rectangle of summer sky and stars. She thought about the names on that list. About her uncle's face when she had kissed his cheek. About the way Nathaniel had laughed that single involuntary sound when she told him about the window and the horses and being 9 years old. She thought about the fact that she had been alone with him in 2 dark buildings now, and had felt both times significantly safer than she felt in lit rooms full of people she had known for years. She thought about what that meant. She did not resolve it. She let it sit. What she knew was this: there was a family to protect. There was a wrong to be answered. There was a man standing somewhere in the dark, between here and his own home, carrying papers that could change everything for everyone she loved, and he was carrying them, because she had told him to take all of it, and he had said yes. That mattered. She wasn't sure what else it meant yet, but it mattered. She went to bed. She did not sleep for a very long time. At 7 o'clock in the morning, Nathaniel Carter knocked on the Whitmore door. She was already at the table, coffee in hand. Document she had drafted at 5 in the morning in front of her, a careful sequenced account of what they had found, organized in the order most likely to protect her father's name and establish the full chain of responsibility. He came in, looked at the document, sat down across from her. "You've been up since 5, he said. 4, she said. He picked up the document. "Read it, set it down." "This is good," he said. "I know," she said. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. And then her father came in from the hallway, and he looked at both of them sitting at his kitchen table in the early morning light with documents between them, and he understood slowly, then all at once, that he was about to learn the truth about his brother. Clara watched her father's face. She stood up, crossed to him, took his hand. "Sit down, Papa," she said, using the word she had not used since she was 12. "We need to tell you something." Her father looked at her, then at Nathaniel. His face was already preparing itself for what it was about to receive. He sat down, and Clara told him everything. She did not soften it. She did not manage it. She held his hand and told him the truth, all of it. The land contracts and the scheme and the documents from the cottage and the desk in the county building and the names on the lists and the routes and the dates and what they meant. She told him about his brother. Her father was quiet for a very long time when she finished. Then he said in a voice she had never heard from him before, older, quieter, stripped of everything that wasn't real. "I knew something was wrong, years ago. I told myself I was imagining it." "You couldn't have known," Clara said. "I should have looked harder," he said. "He was your brother," she said. "You trusted him because he was your brother. That is not a failure. That is what brothers are supposed to be able to do." Her father looked at Nathaniel. "Can it be fixed? My name? The family, can it be made right?" Nathaniel held his gaze. "Yes," he said. "Not easily, but yes." Her father nodded. He was still holding Clara's hand. He held it a little tighter. "Then do what needs doing," he said. "Both of you." He got up, went to the window, stood with his back to them for a moment, and she let him have that moment, and Nathaniel did not speak, and the kitchen was very quiet in the early morning light. Then her father turned around. His face was tired but steadied, resolved. "I'll put on more coffee," he said, and he did. And the three of them sat at the kitchen table, and the plan for Washington took shape word by word. And outside the window the summer morning came in long and hot and indifferent, and Clara thought that whatever happened next, at least now they were moving toward it together. She looked up once and found Nathaniel watching her across the table, not calculating, not managing, just watching with those gray river eyes with an expression she was finally beginning to be able to name. She looked away first, but she remembered it. They left for Washington 2 days later, not 3, because Nathaniel received a message at dawn on the second day that changed the timeline the way a stone changes the surface of still water suddenly and with widening consequence. Clara was at breakfast when he arrived. He did not knock with his usual measured courtesy. He knocked the way people knocked when something had already gone wrong and they were trying to limit how much worse it got. She opened the door herself before the second knock landed. She looked at his face. "What happened?" "Prescott knows," he said. She stepped back to let him in. Her father appeared in the hallway behind her, coffee in hand, still in his morning coat, and took one look at Nathaniel's expression and set the coffee down. "How much does he know?" Clara asked. "Enough," Nathaniel said. "My contact in Richmond sent word an hour ago. Prescott made inquiries yesterday afternoon about the county building. He knows someone was in Edmund's office." He paused. "He will have spoken to your uncle by now." Clara thought about her uncle's face in that office. The half-second shift behind his eyes when Nathaniel had walked in. The too long handshake at the door. "My uncle will tell him everything," she said. "Yes." "Which means Prescott knows we have the documents." "He suspects it," Nathaniel said. "He doesn't know what we found, but he knows enough to move." He looked at her father. "Mr. Whitmore, I need to ask whether you have any correspondence from Edmund Letter's notes, anything in your possession that relates to your arrangement with Prescott." Her father's jaw tightened. "In my study, several letters." "I need them," Nathaniel said. "Today, before we leave." "We leave today," Clara said. "Not a question. This afternoon," he said. "If you can be ready." She looked at him for 3 full seconds, assessing not whether she would go, but whether he understood what he was asking of her family. Whether he had calculated this with the same precision he brought to everything else, or whether this was the moment his control over the situation had slipped. His eyes told her it was the latter, and the fact that he did not hide it told her more than anything he could have said. "Give me 2 hours," she said. She went upstairs. She packed what mattered, not much, because she had learned young that what mattered was rarely the things that took up space. Her mother's locket, the botanical book, the document she had drafted at 4 in the morning, which she had added to twice since, and now understood to be the most important thing she had ever written. Her sister found her in the bedroom doorway, holding the packed bag and looking at the room. "How long?" her sister asked. "I don't know," Clara said. Her sister nodded. She was 21 and considerably wiser than people gave her credit for. She looked at the bag, then at Clara. "He came early this morning," she said. "Yes." "He looked frightened," her sister said. Clara stilled. "Nathaniel doesn't get frightened." "He looked frightened for you," her sister said simply. "There's a difference." Clara did not answer that. She kissed her sister's cheek and went downstairs. Her father had the letters ready, a bundle of them tied with the particular domestic neatness that he applied to everything, even things that had hurt him. He held them out to Nathaniel with a steadiness that cost him something. She could see the cost in his jaw. Nathaniel took them with both hands. "I will make sure these are used correctly," he said. "I know," her father said. "Carter." He stopped, looked at the man in front of him with the eyes that were kind even when they were tired. "Bring her back safe." "Yes, sir," Nathaniel said. And the simplicity of it, no qualification, no caveat, just the clean weight of a promise made Clara look away briefly. They were on the road to Washington before the morning was half over. The carriage was enclosed, which was Nathaniel's arrangement, because an open vehicle would have made them visible, and the road between Virginia and Washington was not long enough for the conversation they needed to have, but would have to have anyway. For the first hour, Nathaniel went through the documents again, carefully, methodically. He had a particular way of reading that she had come to recognize. His eyes moved at a consistent pace that never hurried and never slowed, and occasionally his jaw set slightly harder, which meant he had found something significant. She watched him read and hated that she knew this about him. She was accumulating too many specific things. The not-quite smile, the involuntary laugh, the way he sat down to make himself smaller, the way he said her name not often, but when he did, it had a particular weight, as if the word cost him something, and he paid it anyway. "You're staring," he said without looking up. "I'm thinking," she said. "About what?" "About what we say when we get there," she said, which was partially true. "Who specifically do you trust in Washington?" "There is a man named Hargrove," he said. "Secretary level. He was the one who contacted me originally about Prescott. He is careful and he is honest and he does not enjoy being surprised." Nathaniel turned a page. "He will not enjoy this." "How do we manage that?" "We don't surprise him." He looked up for the first time in an hour. "When we arrive, I send word ahead and ask for a private meeting. We lay it out sequentially, the financial scheme first because that is what he expected, and then the wartime documents, which is what he didn't." He paused. "Your document, the one you wrote at 4 in the morning. "You mean the one I mentioned to you once?" "I mean the one I watched you put in your bag this morning," he said. "I need you to present it, not me, you." She looked at him. "Why?" "Because you wrote it," he said. "Because it is clearer than anything I could produce on the subject of your family, and because when a woman stands in a government office and explains that her own uncle betrayed her country, there is a human weight to that which no document I write can carry." He held her gaze. "I can provide the evidence. You can provide the truth of what it did to real people. Both are necessary." Clara absorbed this. She did not like being necessary in rooms that made her invisible on principle. She had spent enough of her life in those rooms. "They will treat me as a secondary source," she said. "A family member with emotional stake in the outcome." "Some of them will," he said. "And then you will be more precise and more organized than anyone else in the room, and they will recalibrate." She looked at him for a moment. "You have that much confidence in how I'll perform." "I have," he said with absolute evenness, "that much knowledge of how you actually perform." She turned to the window and watched Virginia give way to something flatter, the road unspooling ahead of them, and did not say anything further for a moment. Then she said, "If Hargrove believes us, if he accepts the documents and the wartime evidence, what happens to my uncle?" Nathaniel was quiet for a beat. Arrest, trial. Given the nature of the evidence, almost certainly conviction. And Prescott. The same. The financial fraud alone would be sufficient for significant consequences. The wartime activities. He stopped. He will not leave a courtroom a free man. "How long will this take?" she said. "The investigation, the proceedings." "Months," he said. "Possibly longer. And my family's name in the meantime. That," he said, "is why your document matters. If Hargrove moves quickly to establish the Whitmore family as victims rather than participants, and he will because he is strategically intelligent enough to understand the value of that narrative, then the public account is controlled before the rumor has time to build." She looked back at him. "You've been planning this part too." "I've been thinking about it," he said. "Since the cottage." "Since the cottage," she repeated. "When you found the document with my family's name on it." "Yes." "And you didn't tell me then, because you had just found out your uncle had betrayed your family," he said. "And I needed you to stay functional for the next 12 hours. Clara looked at him. "Nathaniel?" "Yes. I want you to understand something," she said. "I am not a liability that requires management. I am the person standing between my family and ruin. I do not stop being functional because I receive bad news. I have been receiving bad news my entire adult life, and I have remained functional throughout." He held her gaze. "I know that," he said. "I made an error in judgment. I should have told you immediately." She had expected him to defend the decision. The absence of defense disarmed her completely. "Yes," she said. "You should have." "It won't happen again," he said. She believed him. She was not sure when exactly believing him had become her default, but there it was. They reached Washington as the afternoon was deepening into early evening, and Nathaniel sent his message to Hargrove within the hour. The reply came back before they had finished a modest meal at the inn near the government buildings, brief, careful in handwriting that suggested a man who was very controlled about everything, including his penmanship. "Tomorrow morning, 7 o'clock. Come to the east entrance. Tell no one else." Clara read the note over Nathaniel's shoulder and then went to bed and did not sleep for a very long time. And when she did sleep, she dreamed of her mother's rose garden and woke before dawn with the feeling that something had shifted, and she could not yet identify what. Hargrove was 50, gray-haired, with the particular economy of movement that characterized men who had spent decades making consequential decisions and had learned to conserve themselves for the ones that mattered. He looked at Clara when Nathaniel introduced her and said nothing beyond her name, which she recognized as a form of assessment. She was assessed frequently by men who had not yet decided whether she was relevant. She was accustomed to it. She let him look. They sat. Nathaniel laid out the financial documents first as planned. Hargrove listened without interrupting, which told Clara he was either very controlled or already familiar with more than he had let on. She was betting on both. When Nathaniel finished the financial account, he paused. Hargrove said, "There's more." "Yes," Nathaniel said. He laid out the wartime documents. Hargrove went very still. Not the stillness of the man receiving new information. The stillness of a man having a suspicion confirmed that he had been carrying for a long time and had not been able to prove. "Where did you find these?" he said. Nathaniel told him. "All of it. The cottage, the desk, the window that didn't latch." Hargrove looked at Clara. When the window was mentioned, she met his gaze without expression. "The Whitmore family," Hargrove said. "My family," she said. "My father is James Whitmore. He was deceived by my uncle over a period of years and has no involvement in any part of what you are looking at. I have prepared a documented account of the deception and its effects, and I would like you to read it before any formal action is taken." She slid her document across the desk. Hargrove looked at it, then at her. "You wrote this," he said. "I did," she said. He picked it up. He read it at the same pace Nathaniel read things, steady, no rushing, no slowing. When he finished, he set it down and looked at the wall for a moment, which was, she thought, his version of processing. "This is well constructed," he said. "I know," she said. Nathaniel made a sound she had learned to identify as suppressed amusement. Hargrove looked at Nathaniel. "Your assessment of Miss Whitmore's family is consistent with this document." "Entirely," Nathaniel said. "You can attest that the father had no knowledge of the wartime activities." "I can attest to the mechanism by which he was deceived," Nathaniel said. "The documents show it clearly. Edmund Whitmore operated independently of his brother in every aspect that mattered. James Whitmore was a target, not a participant." Hargrove was quiet. He was running calculations Clara could not see, which was its own particular frustration. Then he said, "I'll need 3 days to brief the necessary people. Quietly. I want nothing public until we have controlled the sequence." "That is exactly what we need," Clara said. "The Whitmore name will need to be formally cleared before anything goes to trial," she continued. "My father cannot go before this community as anything other than a victim, or the social damage will compound before the legal outcome has time to matter." Hargrove looked at her with an expression that moved through something she thought might have been surprise, landed on something closer to respect. "You've thought about this thoroughly. My family's reputation is the only asset we have left," she said. "I have had considerable motivation to think thoroughly." Hargrove stood, extended his hand to Nathaniel first, then a beat to Clara. 3 days, he said. "Stay in Washington. I will send word." They were back in the corridor before either of them spoke. "That went well," Clara said. "It did," Nathaniel said. "He was going to shake only your hand." "I noticed." "You were going to let him." "I was going to let you handle it," he said. "Which you did." She looked at him. "When did you start doing that?" He frowned slightly. "Doing what?" "Trusting me to handle things." He was quiet for a moment, considering this as if it were a genuine question that required a genuine answer. "The library," he said. "The night of the Halcourt dinner." She stared at him. "That was the first night we met." "I know," he said. "You told me you don't trust men who keep secrets, and then you made your conditions and held them, and shook my hand and walked out." He paused. "I trusted you to handle things before I trusted anything else about the situation." Clara looked at the corridor wall for a moment because she needed somewhere to look that wasn't him. "That's a significant thing to tell me," she said. "Yes," he said. "I'm aware." She walked forward. He fell into step beside her. They were outside before she found what she wanted to say. "Nathaniel," she said. "Yes." "What happens when this is over?" He looked straight ahead. "What do you want to happen?" She had walked into the wrong question. She recognized it too late. "I want my family to be safe," she said. "I want the right people held accountable. I want—" She stopped. "Clara," he said. She looked at him. "What do you want?" he said. "Not for your family. Just the 2 words. Just, what do you want?" And she heard in them the particular quality of a man who had been waiting to ask a specific question for several weeks and had finally run out of reasons not to. She did not answer immediately. She was not the kind of woman who answered immediately when she needed to be accurate. "I want to know who you are," she said finally. "Not the cold gentleman of Virginia. Not the government contact. Not the man in the dark coat who appeared in my father's library with an impossible proposition." She held his gaze. "The 14-year-old who pulled up his mother's garden. That person. I want to know if he's still in there somewhere." Something happened to Nathaniel Carter's face. Not dramatic. Not sudden. The way ice moves in early spring, not breaking, just shifting the way things shift when they are beginning to remember how to move again. "He is," he said quietly. "He's considerably worse company than the other version." "I disagree," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "Not the investigation, not the Washington meeting." She understood exactly what he meant. "It has been a very long time since I—" He stopped. "I am not practiced at this." "Neither am I," she said. I spent 3 years deciding men weren't worth the effort. And now, she raised her eyebrows. I am standing in Washington at 7:30 in the morning, having broken into a government office 3 nights ago and presented evidence of wartime treason to a federal official. I think we can agree the situation has become complicated. This time, the sound was definite, brief and warm and entirely real. She stored it. 3 days, he said, recovering. We have 3 days while Hargrove works. Yes, she said. I know Washington, he said. There are things worth seeing. If you wanted. He stopped, restarted. I recognize this is not a conventional, I'm not suggesting. Nathaniel, she said. He stopped. Are you asking me to spend 3 days with you in Washington? She said. A pause. Yes, he said. I am. Then say that, she said. Without the qualifications. He looked at her, took a breath. Spend 3 days with me in Washington. Yes, she said. All right. They walked back toward the inn, and the morning was early and warm, and for the first time in weeks, neither of them was managing anything. They were simply two people walking side by side in the same direction, which was, Clara thought, considerably more than it sounded. The 3 days were not simple. They were not the uncomplicated interlude they might have been if the circumstances had been different. Because the circumstances were never different. Messages from Hargrove arrived twice a day. There were additional documents to review a second meeting on the afternoon of the second day, where Hargrove brought a colleague who asked sharp questions that Clara answered sharply back, and Nathaniel watched her do it with an expression she had entirely given up pretending not to notice. But between those things, there were other things. There was the afternoon he showed her the bookshop on the side street 3 stories narrow with a particular quality of light that she would not describe because it would have made her sound sentimental. She spent 2 hours in it. He spent 2 hours sitting in the single chair near the door reading, waiting, not hurrying her. Nobody had ever not hurried her before. There was the evening he told her about the war. Not all of it she understood. Some things were years away from being speakable if they ever got there. But some of it. A night in 1813, when a decision he made saved 11 men, and the fact of their survival had cost him something he could not name and had never been able to give back. He told it without asking for comfort, which was how she knew he needed it. She did not offer comfort. She sat beside him and stayed, which was the only thing she had to give, and which she understood was precisely what he needed. He looked at her when he finished and said, "You didn't say anything." "There wasn't anything to say," she said. "Most people say something," he said. "I'm not most people," she said. "No," he said. "You are very much not." There was the morning of the 3rd day, when Hargrove sent word early that the sequence was set, the arrests were prepared, and the Whitmore family name had been formally documented as victims of a coordinated deception in the federal record. The first and most permanent record, the one that would exist before any trial, and before any newspaper, and before any neighbor had time to form an opinion. Clara read the message at the breakfast table, and her hands shook once briefly, and then were still. Nathaniel saw. He did not say anything. He reached across the table and placed his hand over hers briefly, the same duration as a breath. Then he withdrew it and picked up his coffee and said, "We can leave this afternoon. I can have the carriage ready by 2. "Yes," she said, and her voice was steady. 2 o'clock. But she thought about his hand over hers for the rest of the morning, the particular steadiness of it, the way it had not lingered or pressed or asked anything at all. On the road home, she told him about her mother, not the garden, not the tools with the red stripes, the woman who she had been, how she had laughed, the specific shape of her courage, the way she had managed her husband's disasters, with a grace that Clara had once found infuriating and now understood to be its own form of strength. Nathaniel listened the way he listened to everything, with full attention, nothing divided, nothing withheld. When she finished, he said, "You are like her." "I am like her in some ways," Clara said. "I have more anger than she did." "She probably had more than she showed," he said. Clara thought about this. "Yes," she said after a moment. "You're probably right." The anger isn't a flaw, he said. It's what kept you moving when everything was falling apart. She looked at him. Is that what kept you moving after the war? After your mother's garden? He thought about this with the same seriousness he gave everything. For a long time, he said. Yes. And then it just became habit. Motion. Doing the next necessary thing. He paused. I had forgotten there was supposed to be something more than the next necessary thing. Had, she said, catching the tense. He looked at her. Had, he confirmed, quietly, without elaboration. She faced forward. The road was long, and the afternoon was thick with summer heat, and they still had hours before Virginia, and she was sitting beside a man who had just told her in the most careful possible way that she had reminded him there was supposed to be more. She thought about the worst kisser in America, about the ballroom, about how long ago it felt and how recently it actually was. She thought about the 14-year-old with the garden. She thought about what it meant to trust someone not easily, not because they had earned it in some accountable, measurable way, but because you had stood in enough dark rooms with them and they had never once let you fall. She reached over and placed her hand over his, the way he had done at breakfast. Brief, the duration of a breath. Then she withdrew it. He did not say anything, but she felt from beside her the quality of his silence change into something she had no precise word for, and did not need one. They were almost home. They arrived back in Virginia on a Thursday evening, and by Friday morning the county knew. Not everything. Not the wartime documents, not the federal investigation, not the sequence of events that had begun with a whispered joke in a candlelit ballroom. But enough. Enough for the kind of talk that spread through a community like heat, through dry timber, fast directional, and hungry for anything it could reach. Edmund Whitmore had been taken into federal custody at 6 o'clock Thursday morning, 2 hours before Clara and Nathaniel's carriage crossed back into Virginia. William Prescott had been detained in Richmond at roughly the same hour. Hargrove had moved with the efficiency of a man who had been waiting years for exactly this evidence, and was not going to give anyone time to run. Clara learned this from Nathaniel, who received the confirmation message at their first rest stop outside of Washington. He read it and handed it to her without a word. She read it and handed it back. They sat across from each other in the small roadside inn, and neither of them spoke for a full minute, which was its own kind of conversation. It's done, she said finally. The arrests are, he said. The rest takes time. But the part we can control is done. Yes, he said. That part is done. She nodded, looked at her hands. The document she had written at 4 a.m, the one Hargrove now had, the one that established her father's name, before anything else was no longer in her possession, and she felt the absence of it, the way you felt the absence of something you had been clenching for a long time and had finally let go. What she had not anticipated was how strange it would feel to arrive home without the urgency that had propelled her through the last 3 weeks. The investigation, the arrangements, the cottage and the office, and Washington, all of it, had been motion, and motion was something she understood. What came after motion was something she was less equipped for. Her father met them at the door. He had aged in the 3 days they'd been gone, or perhaps she was simply seeing it more clearly now, with the crisis resolved enough that she could look at him directly. He had the particular look of a man who had received a shock deep enough to rearrange things, and was now standing in the rearranged version of himself, not entirely sure where everything had ended up. He embraced her without speaking. She let him. Then he looked at Nathaniel over her shoulder. "My brother," he said, not a question. "In federal custody," Nathaniel said. "He will be tried." Her father nodded slowly. He looked at the floor for a moment, and when he looked up, his eyes were wet, but his jaw was set. "And my family's name, protected," Nathaniel said. "Formally, before anything else moves publicly. Hargrove guaranteed it." Her father looked at him for a long moment. "You kept your word," he said. "Yes, sir," Nathaniel said. Her father put his hand briefly on Nathaniel's shoulder, the same gesture Nathaniel had offered him weeks ago. Clara noticed returned now with something different in it. Something like gratitude that had moved past gratitude into a territory she didn't have a clean word for. "Come inside," her father said. "Both of you." The first 3 days back were quieter than Clara expected, and louder than she could have prepared for. Quiet because the crisis was resolved. Loud because the community had opinions about the crisis, and Virginia in the summer of 1816 was not a place where opinions stayed private for long. She heard it at the market on the first Saturday, the careful lowering of voices when she passed, the particular attention people gave to their own hands when she came near. She heard it from Mrs. Davies, who stopped her outside the dry goods store with an expression that was 1/3 sympathy and 2/3 the barely contained excitement of a woman who had a significant piece of information and had been waiting for permission to deploy it. "My dear," Mrs. Davies said, "we had no idea. None whatsoever. Your poor father." "He is well," Clara said. "Thank you for asking." "And your uncle—" She lowered her voice to the register people used for disasters and funerals. "It is simply extraordinary. We have all known Edmund for years. Who could have imagined? Deception often operates most effectively among people who have no reason to suspect it," Clara said pleasantly, "which is rather the point of it." Mrs. Davies blinked. Clara smiled, bid her good morning, and walked on. But the walk home was harder than the market. Because in the market she was performing, which was something she knew how to do. On the walk home, she was simply herself, and herself was tired in a way that the last 3 weeks of urgency had kept her from noticing. The exhaustion of it. The long sustained performance of holding everything together for everyone else. She turned into the lane toward the house and found Nathaniel standing at the gate. She stopped. He had not told her he was coming. He was simply there in his dark coat in the late morning heat with an expression that said he had arrived recently enough that he had not yet decided how to arrange his face. "How was the market?" he said. She looked at him. "Mrs. Davies sent her condolences about my uncle while simultaneously making it clear she considers this the most interesting thing to happen in the county since the war. And you?" "I am extraordinarily tired," she said. "And I said something mildly cutting to Mrs. Davies that I may or may not regret by Tuesday." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. "What did you say?" she told him. He made the sound. Brief. Warm. Real. She had stopped trying to file it away. There were too many of them by now. "I came," he said, "because Hargrove sent an additional message this morning." She went still. "About my father?" "No, about you." She waited. "There is a secondary proceeding," Nathaniel said, "related to the wartime documents. Hargrove needs a formal deposition from you about the sequence of events at your uncle's office and the county building. Your testimony as the person who identified the second desk. When?" "In 2 weeks," he said. "In Washington again." She absorbed this. "Is my father required to?" "No," he said. "Only you. Your account is the evidentiary link." She nodded slowly. "All right." He looked at her carefully. "You don't have to be all right with it." "I know," she said, "but I am. It's the correct thing to do, and I'll do it." She paused. "Will you be there?" "Yes," he said with a quiet immediacy that landed differently than she was ready for. She met his eyes and held them for a moment. 3 weeks ago she would have looked away first. She did not look away now. "Good," she said. "Come inside. My father will want to know about the deposition." He followed her in. And something about the way he moved through the door of the Whitmore house without hesitancy, without the formal positioning he had carried in the early weeks, told her that he too had noticed the change. That the house had become a place he walked into rather than a place he was permitted entry. She was not sure when that had happened. She thought it might have been the morning they sat at the kitchen table with her father and the coffee, the plan for Washington taking shape word by word. Or it might have been earlier than that. She was no longer confident she could track the exact moment things had shifted. She only knew that they had. Her father took the news about the deposition with the steadiness he had been building since Washington. Not the false steadiness of a man pretending things were fine, but the genuine steadiness of a man who had looked at the worst truth about his family and was still standing in his own kitchen. He asked 2 practical questions about the timeline, and 1 question about whether Clara would need legal support, and Nathaniel answered all 3. Then her father said with the particular mildness of a man who was being anything but mild, "Carter, I expect you'll stay for lunch." It was not a question. Nathaniel looked at him, then at Clara. "Yes, sir," he said. "Thank you." Lunch was unremarkable in all the ways that mattered. Her sister talked too much about a horse she had seen at the neighboring property. Her father ate more than he had in weeks, which Clara noticed and was grateful for. Nathaniel was quieter than the others, which was simply his nature, but he asked her sister 2 questions about the horse that were specific enough to suggest genuine interest, and her sister, who had not yet made up her mind about Nathaniel Carter, visibly recalibrated. After lunch, her father and sister withdrew in the way families withdrew when they understood that 2 people at their table needed to be left in a room together. Clara cleared 2 cups to the kitchen and came back to find Nathaniel standing near the window, not looking out, just standing in the light with the same quality of presence he always had, that sense of a man who was somewhere entirely, even when he was very still. "What did Hargrove say about you?" she asked. "In the message, about your involvement." He looked at her. "That the federal government is grateful for the service. And unofficially, that I am released from this particular assignment and may return to my own affairs." She watched him. "How do you feel about that?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I don't know what to do with free time," he said. "I have not had a great deal of it." "What did you do before?" she said. "Before the war, before the shipping empire, before the government assignments. What did you do when you were simply yourself?" He thought about this with the same deliberate honesty he applied to everything. "I read," he said. "I sailed. I helped my mother in the garden." He paused. "I was better company." "I dispute that," she said. He looked at her. "You are not bad company," she said. "You are very specific company, which is different." "Most people prefer general company," he said. "I have never been interested in what most people prefer," she said. He held her gaze across the room. The light from the window was the afternoon kind, the sideways kind, the kind that showed every line of things honestly. She did not move from where she was standing. Neither did he. "Clara," he said. "Yes," she said. "The arrangement," he said. "The one we made in the library. It is concluded. The investigation is done. The reason for the pretense no longer exists." "I know," she said, "which means," he said carefully, "that what exists now exists outside of any agreement, outside of any obligation." "Yes," she said. "It does." He crossed the room. Not quickly. The way he did everything with deliberate intention and no wasted motion. He stopped in front of her at a distance that was not the distance of a library negotiation or a dinner party performance. The distance of one person standing in front of another person and meaning to. "I have been thinking about what you said in Washington," he said. "About wanting to know the 14-year-old. "I remember," she said. "He was angry for a very long time," Nathaniel said. "He was afraid, and he turned the fear into discipline because discipline was something he could control, and fear was not. He built things because building was forward motion, and forward motion felt like survival." He paused. He had decided at some point that wanting things was a liability he could not afford. "And now," she said. His jaw tightened slightly, not with tension, with the effort of saying something he had not allowed himself to say for a long time. "I want things," he said. "Specifically." She looked at him. "Tell me specifically then." "I want to spend time with you," he said. "That does not end when there is no further strategic reason for it. I want to know what you think about things that have nothing to do with land contracts or federal investigations. I want to see you angry at things that deserve your anger and amused at things that deserve your amusement. I want—" He stopped. I want there to be more mornings at that table. She listened to all of this. She gave it the honest consideration it deserved. You are aware, she said, that I am not simple to be with. You are the most complicated person I have ever negotiated with, he said. I have not found this discouraging. I still don't trust easily, she said. I know, he said. I'm not asking for easy. I'm asking for the chance to earn it properly, without an arrangement, without a reason beyond the reason. He held her gaze. Just the reason. She thought about the ballroom, the library, the market and the cottage, and the east window that didn't latch, the drive to Washington and the drive back, the bookshop on the side street, his hand over hers at the breakfast table. She thought about what she had said to him on the road home, when she had placed her hand over his, and said nothing, and meant everything, and he had understood completely. She thought about the 14-year-old who had pulled up his mother's garden because looking at it was unbearable, and the 32-year-old who had sent her 12 white roses and a botanical book and asked her sister what she actually liked. I told you in that library, she said, that I don't trust men who keep secrets. You did, he said. You kept one from me, she said. About the extent of the investigation. Yes, he said. And I told you I was wrong to. You did, she said. And then you didn't do it again. He looked at her steadily. That matters, she said. Being told you were wrong is common. Not repeating the wrong is something else entirely. Clara, he said. I'm getting there, she said. Don't rush me. The corner of his mouth moved. 3 weeks ago, she said. I stood in a ballroom and said something careless about a man I had never spoken to based on nothing whatsoever. And since then I have broken into 2 buildings, traveled to Washington, testified before a federal official, and watched my family's name be protected in a government document while sitting across from a man who sent me the right book instead of the expected flowers. She paused. I would like to know you, she said. Not the cold gentleman, not the government contact. You, the specific version of you that asked my sister what I actually liked, and then asked me how I arrived at my conclusions, and sat down at a desk to be less imposing, and actually laughed when I told you about climbing out a window to watch horses at age 9. He was very still. I am not a woman who changes her mind easily, she said. When I decide something, I decide it. So I need you to understand that what I am about to say is decided, and not a performance, and not a strategic calculation. She looked at him directly. I would like there to be more mornings at that table too. He exhaled a slow, controlled breath that she understood represented considerably more than it looked like. Then he reached out and took her hand. Not the brief duration of a breath this time. He held it. Properly. The way you held something you intended to keep. She let him. She more than let him. She closed her fingers around his and felt the calloused palm and the steadiness of the grip, and thought that she had been wrong that summer morning in the candlelit ballroom in every possible way about everything she had said. I owe you an apology, she said. For the ballroom. You don't, he said. I do. I was unkind about someone I didn't know. You were honest about an impression, he said. You updated it when you had more information. That is not something that requires an apology. That is simply good judgment. She looked at him. You are a very specific kind of man. You said that before, he said. I meant it more now, she said. He looked at her for a moment, the gray river eyes fully present, nothing withheld, and said with the quiet certainty of a man who had decided something and would not undecide it. I would like to court you, properly, without an arrangement or a reason or a strategic purpose, if you'll permit it. She considered this for exactly as long as it deserved. I'll permit it, she said. On one condition. Name it, he said. You stop calling it permission, she said. I am not granting you access. We are choosing each other. Those are different things. Something opened in his face. She had not seen that before. Not the not quite smile, not the suppressed sound, not the controlled warmth she had been cataloging. Something new, something that was neither managed nor performed. Yes, he said. They are. He did not kiss her. She had not expected him to, and would not have wanted him to. Not here, not yet. Not when there was so much still to know about each other and so much road still ahead. What he did was raise her hand briefly to his lips in a gesture that was old-fashioned and entirely sincere, and lasted long enough to mean something. She did not tell him she was flustered. She did not particularly succeed at not being flustered. She suspected he knew. The weeks that followed were the first quiet weeks Clara Whitmore had known in years, and quiet turned out to look very different than she had imagined. It was not the absence of difficulty. The deposition was 2 weeks away, and her father still had healing to do, and the community was still rearranging its understanding of the Whitmore family and what it meant. All of that continued. But it continued alongside something else. Something that had its own weight and warmth. Nathaniel came on Tuesday mornings. This was not formalized, not scheduled, not arranged. It simply became true, the way things became true, when two people started organizing themselves around each other without making a point of it. He came on Tuesday mornings, and sometimes stayed through the afternoon, and her father always invited him to stay for supper, and he always did. He brought her one more book. She had not asked him to. It was a history of the Chesapeake shipping trade, which was a peculiar choice, and she said so. "You wanted to know what I do," he said. "That's where I started." She read it. All of it. She had questions. He answered them one evening on the back porch in the summer dark, and she discovered that Nathaniel Carter, talking about ships and water, and the particular mathematics of cargo and tide, was someone she had not met yet, and very much wanted to know. He talked more than she had ever heard him talk. He caught himself at one point and went quiet with the expression of a man who had not realized how much space he'd been taking up. "Don't stop," she said. He looked at her. "I asked because I wanted to know," she said. "Keep going." He kept going. Her sister found them still on the back porch at 10 o'clock, which was late by any reasonable standard, and looked between them with an expression that she was not quite managing to keep neutral. "I was just coming to say good night," her sister said. "Good night?" Clara said. Her sister looked at Nathaniel. "Good night, Mr. Carter." "Good night, Miss Whitmore," he said. Her sister went back inside. 3 seconds later, Clara heard distinctly the sound of suppressed laughter through the kitchen window. Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. "She approves of you," Clara said. "How can you tell?" "She only laughs like that when something is going the way she hoped," Clara said. "He absorbed this." "And your father?" "My father," Clara said, "told me 2 days ago that he could die at peace, knowing I had found someone with actual sense." She paused. "He meant it as a compliment to you. Whether it was a compliment to me is a separate question." The sound came again. Fuller this time. She let herself hear it without filing it away, because she was done filing things away. The deposition in Washington went cleanly. Clara sat across from 2 federal officials and a recorder and spoke for 90 minutes with the same precision she had brought to the document she had written at 4 a.m. weeks ago. She established the sequence, the evidence, the mechanism of deception. She was interrupted twice with questions she answered directly. At the end, the senior official looked at Hargrove and said, "She is very clear." "Yes," Hargrove said. "She is." Nathaniel was in the corridor when she came out. He straightened when he saw her face. "How did it go?" he said. "They said I was very clear," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "Are you all right?" She thought about this honestly. "Yes," she said. "I am. Surprisingly, completely yes." He exhaled slowly. And then in the corridor of a federal building in Washington, with people moving past them on both sides, he reached out and tucked a strand of hair that had come loose back behind her ear, a gesture so quiet and specific and entirely unpremeditated that she felt it in the back of her throat. "Let's go home," he said. "Yes," she said. "Let's." They were married in October, when the Virginia heat had finally gentled into something a person could breathe through in the small church outside of town with her father and sister, and a handful of people who had known the Whitmore family through all of it, through the scandal and the investigation, and the long summer of unlikely developments. Her father cried. Quietly with dignity, the way he did things now feeling them fully, rather than managing them from a distance. Her sister did not cry, but gripped Clara's hand so tightly before the ceremony that Clara had to flex her fingers twice to restore feeling. Nathaniel stood at the front of the church with the particular stillness she had come to understand was not coldness, but simply the way he inhabited certainty. He did not fidget. He did not scan the exits with his soldier's eyes. He was entirely present in a way she had watched him become over the course of one extraordinary summer. When she walked toward him, he looked at her the way he had looked at her across her father's kitchen table on the morning they had told her father everything, with that expression she had finally found the name for. Not calculation, not management, not the controlled attention of a man running angles she couldn't see. Recognition? The particular look of a person who has found the specific other person they had stopped believing existed. At the end of the ceremony, when he took her hand, she felt the calloused palm and the steady grip, and thought about a ballroom a lifetime ago, and a careless sentence, and the extraordinary chain of consequences that had followed it. She thought about what she had said in her mother's kitchen on the day she had been given 60 seconds to fall apart. I'm going to make this right. This. She had. They had. It was not a clean or simple right. There were still months of proceedings ahead, still a community, still finding its footing, still a father, still learning to live without a brother he thought he had known. But right was rarely clean or simple. Right was mostly people deciding to choose responsibility over convenience and truth over comfort and each other over the safer, lonelier alternatives. After the ceremony, standing in the church doorway while the guests moved past them into the bright October afternoon, Nathaniel leaned close to her and said very quietly, "Miss Whitmore." She looked at him. "That is no longer my name," she said. "I know," he said. "I wanted to say it one more time." A pause. I rather liked her. Clara looked at the man standing beside her, the man who had appeared in a ballroom shadow and turned a careless joke into the most consequential summer of her life, and felt something she recognized from her mother's stories and had never quite believed in for herself until the moment she stood in a library with a letter pressed flat against her wrist and a man who sat down to be less imposing. "She liked you too," Clara said. "Eventually." "I know," he said. "I was paying attention." She looked at him, at the gray river eyes, at the line of his jaw, at the man who had been called cold for so long that he had almost forgotten it was never entirely true. She took his hand. He closed his fingers around hers, and this time neither of them counted the duration because there was no longer any reason to. Some people spent their whole lives waiting to feel safe enough to be known. Clara Whitmore. Clara Carter now had spent one summer in Virginia in the heat of 1816, being challenged and challenged and challenged again, and had discovered that she did not need to wait for safety. She only needed someone willing to stay in the dark rooms with her. She had found him in the most unlikely place. She had found him in the whisper she could not take back.